Now, I've talked before about the worst sequels the 1990s gave us, so let's turn the tables a bit and focus on the best sequels from this complicated decade. In the 1990s, sequels stopped behaving like polite dinner guests. They kicked off their shoes, opened the fridge, and announced they were staying for the weekend, possibly borrowing a sweatshirt and leaving a few unexplained items in the bathroom. Hollywood had always loved a part 2. But the decade turned the practice into a high art form. Bigger budgets, bolder swings, and a surprising willingness to wink at the audience while blowing up half a city. If the 1980s treated sequels like a second helping, the 1990s treated them like an entire buffet. And, against all odds, quite a few plates came back clean. Audiences didn't just tolerate follow-ups. They planned for them, argued about them, and developed the kind of fond, oddly specific memories that attach themselves to a particular punchline, a particular explosion, or a particular moment when a character did something so iconic it became part of the decade's shared vocabulary. In the summer of 1990, when action movies still believed airports were the purest laboratory for human stress, Die Hard 2 arrived on July 4th and politely informed audiences that John McClane could, in fact, have a worse holiday than the last one. The first film had made the modern office tower feel like a booby-trapped maze. The sequel looked at that and said, with great confidence, fine, but what if the maze has weather? It doubled down on the franchise's favorite idea, one exhausted man versus an entire infrastructure, then added snow, runway lights, and the sort of escalating chaos that makes a viewer grateful for modern baggage fees, if only because they feel like a small price to pay for staying home. This time, we leave the sunny streets of Los Angeles behind, and instead move to a frostbitten Washington Dulles airport, where a band of corrupt ex-U.S. Army Special Forces soldiers cripple the airport and hold multiple airliners hostage above the nation's capital, including McClane's wife, so that they can free a South American drug lord being flown in that evening. Much like the original Die Hard, things get pretty preposterous. The plot holes are big and gaping. Like, why didn't the authorities just get in touch with someone on an unaffected radio system who could contact the affected airliners and send them to other airports, of which there are plenty in the vicinity of Washington, D.C.? Or better yet, why not use airphones? Remember them? They were a thing on planes in 1990. Get in touch with the flights that way. Also, why are the police always so stupid in these movies? You'd think they'd have learned to trust McClane's intuition after the last one. Then there's the action scenes, which bring the usual one-man army vibe to our favorite police lieutenant. There's exploding ski-doos, terrorists getting their heads crushed in baggage reclaim, a pretty funny escape using an ejector seat in a plane that really shouldn't be fitted with one, a fist fight on the wing of a 747, culminating in a big, fat explosion thanks to a single stream of leaking fuel from the engine, a cigarette lighter, and the good old-fashioned yippee-ki-yay, mother, you know the rest. But honestly, despite plot holes so large, you could drive a bus through them. And the fact that McClane once again should have been killed at least a dozen times throughout this movie, just like in the last one, none of that really matters because the film is so good, so engaging, so action-packed, and so much fun. Its real sequel magic is how quickly it makes I Just Want to Get Home feel like a mythological quest. Because the moment McClane steps into the airport, he's essentially competing against clocks, crowds, bureaucracy, and villains who behave as if they took a seminar titled How to Be Extra at an International Terminal. There's a particular kind of 1990s comfort in how the movie treats aviation technology as both miracle and menace, and in how it suggests that if you talk to the wrong person at the wrong desk, you might as well be climbing a mountain in your socks. That autumn, Predator 2 stalked into theaters on November 21st, 1990, and performed a bold civic experiment. What if the Predator's camouflage was tested against neon, concrete, and the general noise level of a big city? Predator 2 moves the action from the Latin American war zone of the previous movie to the streets of downtown Los Angeles, which itself is already in the midst of a big fat urban battle between overwhelming criminal elements and the overworked, undermanned LAPD. Into the fray steps Lieutenant Mike Harrigan, played by Danny Glover, who has to juggle his vendetta against the warring gangs with the sudden appearance of a new, more sophisticated threat in the form of the Predator, which has turned his city into its own personal safari, with Harrigan as the ultimate prize. Predator 2 works because it doesn't fully repeat the same beats of the first movie, but instead builds upon them while remaining faithful to the lore of the original. It gives a perfect background as to the presence of the Predator and its motivations without sabotaging its mystique, leaving the audience with just enough questions to keep the intergalactic hunter an enigma that you genuinely want to understand more about. What works also is Danny Glover, who brings an everyman survival to the franchise, and thus makes him an equally compelling character to the elite squad of the previous movie. The impression you got with the first Predator movie is that a crack team of muscle-bound Special Forces soldiers, working their way through the plot of a generic 80s action movie like Commando or the Delta Force, accidentally stumbled across a highly skilled alien hunter in the rainforest, and the premise completely pivots from the action thriller to the survival horror genre. Predator 2, meanwhile, feels more like what would happen if people closer to normality were confronted in their own backyard with such a menace and what they would do to combat it. The sequel's great historical contribution was its confidence that a creature designed for trees could thrive among traffic, sirens, and people who already looked stressed enough without intergalactic big game hunting. It also carries that very 1990s belief that a city is a living organism, dense, loud, full of shortcuts, and full of corners where something unpleasant might be waiting. In the process, it becomes a different kind of monster movie, one where the hunt doesn't just happen in the environment, but seems to be encouraged by it, as if the streets themselves are providing cover and commentary. It's the rare sequel that doesn't just change scenery for variety, but for attitude, swapping jungle paranoia for urban frenzy, and letting the Predator discover that in a metropolis, everyone is prey to something. Commutes, headlines, tempers, and now apparently a trophy collector with advanced optics. And then they went and ruined it all with a bunch of awful sequels. I mean, Predator Badlands? What the hell was that? Anyway, by June 28, 1991, the decade's sequels began to show a particular kind of self-awareness, part craft, part mischief, with The Naked Gun 2.5, The Smell of Fear. It treated the very concept of follow-up like a setup to a joke, then committed to the punchline with the sincerity of a man who has never met a visual gag he wouldn't tackle at a full sprint. This time, Lieutenant Frank Drebin of Police Squad is in Washington, D.C., and he's on the hunt for the kidnapper of renowned energy advisor Dr. Albert S. Meinheimer, who plans to set out a new energy policy to President Bush that threatens the dominance of coal, oil, and nuclear power. Along the way, there are sex shops, escaped zoo animals, raw sewage, small nuclear devices, dead ringers with questionable hairdos, and Barbara Bush getting all kinds of abuse. If I remember correctly, Barbara Bush said she actually really loved this movie. The film behaves like it's in a hurry to get to the next absurdity, and in doing so, it becomes a kind of cinematic vaudeville, where the plot is mostly there so people have rooms to enter in correctly. It also demonstrates a uniquely sequel-shaped confidence. It doesn't need to explain why Frank Drebin is the way he is. The audience already knows. The fun is watching the film use that familiarity as a trampoline, bouncing higher into wordplay, misunderstandings, and physical comedy that lands with the thud of absolute commitment. In the annals of sequel history, it stands as proof that escalation does not require darkness or gravitas. Sometimes it requires only a straight face, an aggressively serious delivery, and the absolute refusal to behave normally in public. It's also a reminder that the early 90s were still a time when comedy sequels could be shamelessly silly without apologizing for it, as if the cultural motto was, yes, this is ridiculous, and no, we will not be taking questions. Also, I always laugh at this joke.
Do you realize that because of you, this city is being overrun by baboons?
Well, isn't that the fault of the voters?
But that's second only to this joke.
He certainly seems to get around marvelously.
God, I love this movie. Anyway, again, 5 days later, on July 3rd, 1991, the sequel era hit a kind of peak athletic form with Terminator 2, Judgment Day, a film so often cited as the decade's best follow-up that it practically became the unit of measurement for sequels that didn't just cash a check. Terminator 2 picks up in 1995, where John Connor, the future leader of the resistance against Skynet's machines, is now threatened as a teenage boy by the T-1000, a liquid metal assassin sent back in time to destroy him. His only savior is his mother, Sarah Connor, who has been institutionalized for trying to sabotage the development of Skynet. And the T-800, again played by Arnold Schwarzenegger, who, in an excellent twist, has been reprogrammed to protect John Connor by his future self, leading to the ultimate battle of machine versus machine in the sun-baked streets of Los Angeles. If the first Terminator had been a lean nightmare with a punk heartbeat, the second arrived like a technological parade, bigger, slicker, and somehow more emotional, without losing its ability to smash through a wall. It came bearing revolutionary effects, including a shape-shifting villain that looked like the future had been poured directly onto the screen, and it paired that leap with something unexpectedly tender, a machine learning humanity, like it was a new software update, with feelings included. The movie's historical role is partly about spectacle, liquid metal, roaring chases, the sense that physics had signed a waiver, but it's also about how it reframed what a sequel could do. It didn't merely continue the story, it rewired it, turning a once unstoppable horror into a protector, and letting the audience wrestle with the strange comfort of being saved by something that shouldn't have a soul. In the lighthearted history of cinema, it remains the rare entry that can make audiences cheer for a motorcycle chase and then quietly swallow hard at the end, as if the action genre briefly remembered it had a heart and decided to show it carefully for just long enough to matter. The next year leaned into gothic snow globe theatrics. Batman Returns, released June 19, 1992, proved that a sequel could become stranger, darker, and somehow more festive at the same time, like a Christmas party where everyone is dressed impeccably and no one is emotionally okay. It took the general idea of a superhero follow-up and treated it less like a continuation and more like a second pass at a painting. Deeper shadows and sharper contrasts included. This time, Batman faces off against two primary villains. The Penguin, a deformed man seeking his birthright and control of Gotham, and Catwoman, the vengeful secretary of the corrupt businessman, Max Schreck. Tim Burton's Gotham looked like it had been designed by a talented artist who'd been handed unlimited budget and a lifetime supply of black eyeliner, and the film expanded the series by making its villains feel less like obstacles and more like operatic weather systems. There's a sequel-specific boldness in how it embraces its own mood. It doesn't attempt to be universally cozy, even though it is technically set during the holidays. Instead, it's a story where snow falls like confetti at a haunted parade, and where power looks glamorous until it looks grotesque. In this way, the film becomes a historical snapshot of early 90s blockbuster ambition, when a studio sequel could still be unmistakably shaped by an auteur's sensibilities, and when the mainstream was willing to follow that sensibility into something wonderfully weird. However, this weirdness and darkness also made the film very polarizing upon its release. The first Batman movie from 1989 had been camp escapism with the simple premise of Batman fighting against the Joker. The sequel, however, saw Burton push his gothic style into overdrive. But for many, when compared to the previous movie, the change was almost alienating, especially for the family-friendly market. In the aftermath of this, Burton would be moved out of the director's chair for Batman Forever, with Joel Schumacher delivering something with broader audience appeal, but not the same psychological weight or artistic credibility. But none of this detracts from the fact that Batman Returns is an incredible film. Dark, gritty, harsh, and visceral, like picking a scab, sometimes painful, but unbelievably satisfying. Then, on November 20th, 1992, Home Alone 2, Lost in New York, reintroduced Kevin McAllister and made one decisive historical upgrade. Instead of defending a suburban home, he got Manhattan at Christmas. This time, while Kevin is able to actually get to the airport with his folks, a mix-up in the terminal sends him flying off by himself to New York City with his dad's credit card. From there, he embarks on every kid's dream of exploring the Big Apple at Christmas, only to find his enjoyment disrupted by the reappearance of the Wet Bandits from the first film, who want to exact payback on Kevin for what he did to them last time. The sequel's genius was understanding that the city itself could be a co-star, towering, twinkling, and packed with enough strange adults to make a child's solo adventure feel both magical and mildly concerning. It kept the slapstick tradition alive with an enthusiasm that suggested the laws of physics were optional, and it turned the idea of being lost into a travel brochure written by an 8-year-old with a credit card and a grudge. In sequel terms, it also demonstrates a particular 1990s faith in place. New York becomes a playground, a maze, and a postcard all at once. The kind of setting where every corner promises either wonder or trouble, sometimes both in the same frame. The film works because it understands what audiences really wanted from a follow-up. Not a completely new story, but a bigger toy box. The traps get larger, the faces meet more bricks, and the holiday sentiment is applied like frosting. Sweet, generous, and layered on top of the chaos until it feels like part of the tradition. By the end, it is essentially argued that the true meaning of Christmas is resourcefulness, mischief, and finding your family after you've made a memorable mess of the city. On November 19, 1993, Addams Family Values arrived and quietly took the crown for sequels that understood tone better than most people understand their own relatives. It sharpened the comedy into something darker and cleaner, like a silver knife polished just for dinner conversation, and it expanded the family's world without sanding off any of the macabre charm. In this film, we follow the family as they welcome a new baby, Pubert, while Wednesday and Pugsley try to kill him. At the same time, hired nanny, Debbie Jelinski, tries to marry and murder Uncle Fester for his fortune, and the children are sent to a cheerful summer camp. If the first film introduced the Addamses as a delightful violation of normalcy, the sequel let them settle in and become an institution of their own oddness, as if they were the community's most polite haunting. The film's place in sequel history comes from its confidence. It didn't try to become bigger by becoming louder. It became better by becoming more itself, which is a very Addams way to succeed. There's a refined boldness in the way it balances warmth and morbidity, making sincerity feel funnier because it's delivered by people who treat existential gloom like a family hobby. It also captures a particular 90s appetite for ensemble comedy where every character gets to shine, often by being slightly alarming in a way that's still charming. In the end, the sequel doesn't just repeat the formula, it deepens it, like a family portrait that looks more cheerful the longer you stare, until you realize the cheer's coming from an entirely different definition of happiness. March 18, 1994, brought Naked Gun 33 and 1/3, The Final Insult, which treated the idea of a trilogy finale as a final chance to test how many jokes could fit into a single scene before reality filed a complaint. The plot of this one starts with Drebin, now retired from police squad, having to step back into the world of the criminal underclass in order to stop a terrorist from blowing up the Academy Awards, encountering along the way sexy temptresses with, questionable secrets, a Los Angeles high school, a train station full of mobsters, lawnmowers, and disgruntled postal workers, a whole lot of dirt, a splatted road worker, Dr. Rosenblack, a dancing Mother Teresa, and a giant geriatric. In a decade increasingly fascinated by continuity and canon, this film represented a competing philosophy. Continuity is nice, but a gag is nicer, and canon can wait while someone walks into the wrong room and salutes the wrong object. What makes it especially sequel appropriate is its sense of escalation through absurdity rather than stakes. It assumes the audience is already on board, so it spends its energy on speed, density, and surprise. It's the cinematic equivalent of a comedian refusing to let the room breathe, because breathing might give people time to notice how silly everything is. Yet that's the point. The film's legacy is the way it treats silliness as an art that deserves craftsmanship. It served as a reminder that sequels weren't only about raising stakes. Sometimes they were about raising eyebrows, raising the tempo, and raising the probability that an innocent background extra will become part of a joke against their will. In the light history of 1990s comedies, it stands as a capstone to a kind of parody filmmaking that believed laughter was best achieved by barreling forward with complete, unshakable seriousness. Unbelievably, the Naked Gun trilogy is one of the few movie trilogies that is pretty much perfect. All three films are enjoyable, have their standout moments, their heart, their laughs, and a general sense that they were made with a desire to create something that will leave audiences rolling with hysterics. And in that context, all three of them succeed in equal measure. By May 19, 1995, action sequels were in a particularly confident mood, and Die Hard with a Vengeance took that confidence for a run through New York City. It returned the series to a brisk, gritty rhythm, then added a buddy dynamic that felt less like a formula and more like two people discovering, loudly, that collaboration is easier than dying alone. McClane finally arrives in New York City and is now being menaced by Simon Gruber, the brother of Hans Gruber from the first movie, as he is forced to jump through a psychotic game of Simon Says in order to stop large bombs from systematically reducing the Big Apple to rubble one by one. Along the way, he picks up the Good Samaritan, Zeus Carver, played by Samuel L. Jackson, who is forced to play along too as the stakes become increasingly more dire, and the entire city becomes fair game for Simon's perverse wrath. Where the second film trapped McClane in a single system, this one turned the whole of New York into the system. A sprawling board game of riddles, payphones, traffic, and public irritation. The film's historical charm is that it understands momentum. It barely pauses long enough for anyone to drink water, as if stopping might give the city time to realize what's happening and ask them to leave. It also captures something distinctly mid-1990s about urban action. The sense that every street corner is cinematic, every cab could be part of a chase, and every public space can become a stage for a larger-than-life crisis. As a sequel, it succeeds by feeling like a return, not just to a character, but to a tone, scrappy, sharp, and fueled by the belief that the best action scenes are the ones that look like they're happening 5 minutes too fast for anyone to fully process. Also, I'd just like to take a moment to mention the original ending, which ends with McClane turning the tables on Simon in an Eastern European bar with his own version of the Simon Says game. While it doesn't feel anything like a traditional Die Hard movie ending, I still think it is one really, really smooth ending, and I love it. Would it have fit the ending of Die Hard 3? Probably not. But in isolation, it is still a fantastically written, acted, and shot conclusion to the last genuinely good Die Hard movie. On April 9th, 1996, Tremors 2 Aftershocks continued one of the decade's most endearing sequel traditions, taking a delightfully odd original and building outward without losing the weird grin at the center. This time, the story heads to Mexico, where Earl Bassett, played again by the late, great Fred Ward, has been contracted to decimate a new outbreak of graboids that have been killing workers at a remote oil refinery. Partnering up with Fanboy and General Ditz, Grady Hoover, as well as the always fantastic Michael Gross as Burt Gummer, Tremors 2 expands the creature feature playbook with new variations on subterranean terror, then balanced it with a sort of practical blue-collar problem-solving that makes monster hunting feel like a trade job with bad benefits. The sequel charm here is its willingness to treat its premise with both respect and a wink. Yes, the monsters are ridiculous, and yes, they are absolutely a problem that must be solved with tools, teamwork, and occasional shouting. By widening the world and introducing new complications, it embraces the idea that a sequel can be a field guide, not just a repeat performance. More information, more creatures, more chances for the characters to look at the ground and say, in essence, not again. Now, there are some problems. The CGI is very choppy. I appreciate this is 1996 and that this is a direct-to-video sequel, but even for the era, the visual effects are kind of poor. The shrieky monsters, aside from the few practical props used for close-ups, never look like they're actually there, and it really shows. Also, some of the expansions to the Tremors lore are a bit questionable. Not just because of the shrieky monsters bursting out of the graboids' stomachs being part of their life cycle, but also the revelation that the graboids existed in the Precambrian era is kind of silly. Pretty much all life forms in that period were unicellular organisms or soft-bodied creatures like jellyfish or sponges. So the fact that there's a 30-foot carnivorous worm roaming around at the same time as jellyfish and amoeba is, well, a little dumb. But the movie isn't completely stupid, and it can be a touch suspenseful. The unveiling of the shrieky beasties is actually done really well. The practical effects for the graboids are just as good as the original movie. Fred Ward and Michael Gross once again provide consistent fun and characters you can get behind. And overall, the film is just great to watch on a rainy afternoon while ironing your laundry. In sequel history, it's a reminder that bigger can also mean more playful, especially when the ground itself keeps trying to eat you. And in the broader landscape of 90s follow-ups, it stands as a tribute to the kind of mid-budget imagination that didn't need to save the planet to have fun. It only needed to save whoever was standing nearest to the rumbling. Also, on a side note, I recommend Tremors 4 as another pretty good sequel. The rest of them are just stupid, though, so don't waste your time on those. December 12th, 1997, delivered Scream 2, and with it, the decade's great meta-sequel trick, making a follow-up about the very pressure of making a follow-up. It continued to satirize slasher rules while acknowledging that audiences now arrived armed with expectations, theories, and the dangerous belief that they were harder to surprise. In this one, Sydney and tabloid reporter Gail Weathers, who survived the events of the first Scream, find that after 2 college students are murdered at a sneak preview of Stab, a movie based on the events from the first film, it's clear a copycat killer is on the loose, and it's up to Sydney and Gail, as well as fellow survivors Deputy Dewey and Randy, to find out who was behind this new murder spree before they all end up dead as well. What makes it feel especially of its time is how it turns a franchise into a conversation, as if the characters and the viewers are both aware that they're participating in a cultural event. The film's historical importance rests in how smoothly it keeps the joke going without deflating the fear, like a comedian who can still turn off the lights and make a room go quiet. As a sequel, it also reflects a new kind of audience literacy. People had seen enough horror movies to recognize patterns, and the movie had the mischievous intelligence to say, "Great, now watch us use those patterns against you." In the late 90s, that self-awareness felt fresh, a sign that mainstream genre films could be smart about themselves without collapsing into smugness. It's a follow-up that understands sequels are judged differently, by surprises, by shocks, by whether they justify their existence, and it meets that test by turning the very act of being judged into part of the suspense. By June 11th, 1999, the sequel era had become so comfortable with itself that it could parody entire genres while also expanding its own universe, and Austin Powers, The Spy Who Shagged Me, did exactly that. It took the swingin' spy spoof of the first film and turned the dial up until it nearly came off in someone's hand, adding bigger set pieces, broader characters, and a cheerfully shameless commitment to jokes that felt like they were wearing ruffled shirts. In his second screen adventure, British super spy Austin Powers must return to 1969 as arch-nemesis Dr. Evil has ventured back to that year and successfully stolen Austin's mojo and set up a powerful laser and aimed it at Earth. With the help of gorgeous agent Felicity Shagwell, the newly single Austin must now not only contend with Dr. Evil, but also Evil's vicious, pint-sized attack clone, Mini-Me. The film's sequel confidence is in how it assumes affection. The audience is already in on the bit, already knows the rhythm, so it feels free to build a bigger playground for that rhythm to echo. It's also a reminder that late 90s comedy could be oddly communal, built around catchphrases and shared references that people carried into everyday conversation like souvenirs. In the history of 90s sequels, it stands as a cultural moment when audiences agreed, collectively and with suspicious enthusiasm, that a follow-up could be both more ridiculous and more beloved, and that a sequel could deepen its world simply by insisting, louder, that the world is silly and that everyone should relax and enjoy the ride. Finally, we round out the decade with one of the best. And on November 24th, 1999, Toy Story 2 arrived and made a strong late-decade argument that the most emotionally devastating sequels might be the ones starring plastic. It expanded the first film's world into questions about purpose, abandonment, and what it means to be played with, then wrapped those ideas in adventure, comedy, and the kind of craftsmanship that made computer animation feel less like a novelty and more like a new storytelling language. In Toy Story 2, Woody is kidnapped by Al McWiggin, an avaricious toy collector and owner of Al's toy barn, and is put into a collection alongside Jessie, a cowgirl, Stinky Pete, an elderly prospector, and Bullseye the horse. As it turns out, Woody is an especially valuable item from a popular 1950s children's TV show and is worth a fortune, with his future and those of his fellow cast members being in a Japanese museum. Unaware of this, Buzz and the other toys in Andy's bedroom set out on a rescue mission to save Woody, confronting all kinds of obstacles along the way, including an army of other Buzz Lightyears, Barbie dolls, the Emperor Zurg, an international airport, and the Pizza Planet pickup truck. To my mind, aside from high-quality animes like those of Studio Ghibli, this is the definitive movie that shows that animation, and even children's films in general, can go beyond just being silly fun for kids. They can have genuine heart, tear-jerking moments, a brain in their head, and a deep, meaningful story that is a reflection not just of the characters, but of ourselves. Where many sequels of the era chased scale. This one chased depth, letting toys wrestle with the passage of time in a way that felt both gentle and quietly overwhelming. It managed to be funny and fleet, while still sneaking in the kind of melancholy that arrives when someone realizes they are loved, but not forever. As a closing note to the decade's sequel story, it proved that bigger universes weren't only for action heroes and masked killers. Sometimes they belonged to a cowboy, a space ranger, and the quiet fear of ending up in a box. And in the larger, lighthearted history of 1990s cinema, it stands as a final, elegant twist of the knife. The decade's most advanced animation could still deliver one of its most human truths softly through the eyes of a toy waiting to see if someone comes back. Taken together, these films reveal what the 1990s did best with sequels. They treated them as opportunities rather than obligations. Sometimes the opportunity was technological, sometimes tonal, sometimes as simple as moving a monster from the jungle to the city or a kid from a house to Manhattan. The decade's best follow-ups expanded universes, sharpened identities, and, more often than anyone expected, matched or even surpassed what came before. They understood that a sequel could be an escalation, but it could also be a refinement, a deeper dig into character, or a more daring expression of style. If the 1990s were a history lesson, it would be this. The second time around doesn't have to be a rerun. In the right hands, it can be the moment the story becomes legend. The point where a franchise stops being a single film and turns into a shared cultural reference, a set of scenes and lines and images that people carry with them long after the credits roll.
Come along, let's sing where the joy will bring. Tune into the beat, feel the magic, it's true. Channel 199 on X, we're here just for you.